Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to My Money, Your Money, where we talk about all things money with the goal of closing the racial wealth gap. I am your host, Brigette Lumpkins. Um, I have earned an MBA from Wharton and worked at firms such as Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, and Barclays, serving institutional and private clients and raising capital for investment funds. We're brought to you by our very generous sponsors, DeMesman and Dover Accident Attorneys, the AARP, FAMU Mary, and the Palm Beach Solid Waste Authority. I am so thrilled to welcome our guest today, Mr. Ron Long, who is an executive at Wells Fargo, running the head of their aging client services. June, as you may know, is Elder Abuse Month. And while elder abuse comes in many forms, the focus of our conversation today will be elder financial abuse. Sadly, it's clear that many of our older citizens are mistreated in a myriad of ways. So if you need help for a friend, relative, or yourself, please contact Adult Protective Services or, if applicable, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. But back to our guest. Ron is a well-regarded expert and public speaker on the topic of elder financial abuse and has a background at the Securities Exchange Commission, also known as the SEC, and as an accounting fraud examiner. So I'm sure he has plenty to share. I will let him tell us a little bit more about himself before we get started with the discussion. So welcome, Ron. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brigette, and thanks for that introduction. And this is an area that's a big passion for me, focusing on elder financial abuse. And I don't get to often speak about it from the African American perspective. And one of the things you said in the introduction, elder abuse comes in many forms, but for African Americans, the most prevalent form of abuse of our elders is elder financial abuse. So this is the area where we can, as a community, take that first step to start protecting not only our personal elders, grandparents, parents, but the community at large. So I'm looking forward to sharing some information today.
Okay, so can you give us a little bit more about your background and what led you to the specific specialty? You said this is a passion of yours. Was it personal? Did you experience this in your family? What inspired you to focus on this as a career?
Sure. So I did spend that time at the Securities and Exchange Commission. So we're doing the regulating of the securities markets. And in doing so, you would try to protect investors. I joined the Wells Fargo folks, and in joining them, working with a number of the financial advisors, we started to get calls about their concerns with their clients. Many times that 45-year-old son who couldn't get off mom's couch and is starting to spend down her retirement money at a rate far faster and in larger amounts than we had planned. But sometimes the issue was that person who did all the great work in their 40s and 50s to gather assets, but then unfortunately dementia or diminished capacity starts to set in. And again, that was a threat to their finances. So early on, we didn't have any real clear tools in the financial industry to focus on elder abuse. So having my mom will be 98 in August. So having that own personal relationship, we decided to take it on as an initiative and started working with Adult Protective Services, a number of the regulators, and other financial firms actually, to all pull together to see if we can do things that would help make those later years safer and financially prosperous for our older generation.
So you said something at the top, which I was going to ask later, and so you partly answered my question, which I was going to ask, what is the most common form of elder abuse? And you said in the Black community, which is what we focus on this show, is financial. So in what forms does it take? You mentioned the failed to launch child who's overspending, and you mentioned diminished capacity. But what are you seeing? Are you seeing deception, coercion, just leaking of assets without any protection? When people become diminished in their capacity, what's really most prominent?
Well, again, in the African American community hasn't been well studied, but one thing we did find is that we're 2 to 8 times more likely to suffer from financial abuse than the majority community. And also, when you talk about what types of abuse, and this is unfortunate in most cases, whether you're black or white, tends the abuse tends to be someone you know or a family member. So that is just the majority of it. But when you get past that, more than any other community, African Americans tend to fall for the stranger scam, that
Okay.
outside person outside of the community. And of those scams we're seeing, I would say the top three are first and foremost is the romance scam. Somehow online, you found the love of your life. He or she just
Oh,
happens to be in a foreign country and they've run into a tight spot, and only if you could send them five, $10,000 or more, unfortunately, they can fly to the U.S. and live happily after. And we know that that doesn't happen. The other scam that's very prevalent now is the tech support scam. This is
mhm.
where you you think you have a problem with your computer, you type on uh, a link or what have you, and that takes you to a person who says, "Certainly, I can take care of your computer. Give me access." Unfortunately, you give them access, they don't take care of your computer. They actually go into your own bank account, and they literally move money from your own bank account from savings to checking and convince you, oh, you've received money from our firm accidentally. I need you to send that $20,000 back to us. And you look at your account and it does appear in checking there's $20,000 more than you had when you opened it initially. You don't realize that it's your own $20,000. It just simply moved from savings to checking. And then you're wiring money back to the scammer. And it's only later that you realize you sent him your own money. And then the final one, which is a really, you can understand it, but it's one we've got to really prepare ourselves for, which I call it the granny or grandparent scam. And this is where you get the call from the grandchild. Grandma, it's me. I'm in usually a foreign country or I'm in an accident. They say I will be in jail unless you pay for the local lawyer. It's X thousands of dollars. Can you go to the bank and wire it and then I'll be free? It's not your grandchild, it's some scammer. I think in a lot of our social media, we may share too much information so that
Right.
they may have a few facts that they know about that grandchild. And then
Yeah.
again, that's a scam. And you can understand a grandparent wanting to take care of
Love
that
them all.
child. If I could say
Yeah.
one thing here for the
Yeah.
grandparent scam, you have got to start calling your kids. You got to call the mother of that grandchild, the
Right.
father of that grandchild before you do anything that would have you move money to supposedly protect them.
That's heartbreaking. And I do notice that my older relatives tend to be a lot less, savvy about the boundaries on social media.
Yeah.
So, and the younger ones too. It seems like only the people who are like sort of Gen X who have any sense on social
Yeah.
media, but the really young kids overshare and the older people really overshare too. But that's really heartbreaking. That tugged on my heart, especially the romance scam. But we could see that on 90 Day Fiance every single day, right?
Well,
And
and one of the things with the romance scam, they don't limit themselves to Facebook or Match.com or Christian Sing, whatever the mingle singles it is today.
yeah,
They will pick you up on Words with Friends. They will pick you up on other social games where you think I'm just playing Words with Friends, but the second or third word, all of a sudden the chat starts. And it
wow. And so you really caught off guard, right? Because your guard's
totally
not up.
off
I
guard.
think when you're on Bumble or whatever, you sort of already have this like paradigm, like this framework that I need to be careful of people who might take advantage of me.
Exactly.
But you really have your guard down when you're playing Words with Friends or chess. Chess is my thing these days. I
Oh,
keep getting
okay. Sure.
I'm really bad. Um, where if somebody started chatting with me on chess, it would take me a minute to realize that they were trying to be manipulative in that way. So that's really interesting, especially if I were older and not really a digital native, right? And I think
Right.
that's part of
Exactly.
the challenge is not being digital natives, makes it easier. Wow, that's really interesting.
Well, and that's your point there, though, is And one of our defenses, we think, is that family meeting, that family conversation. So if you know mom or dad isn't as digitally savvy, have a chance to have that half-hour tutorial.
Yeah.
Get them a couple of skills. Let them know that they should never, ever call directly somebody that approached them on the internet. If you need to
Mhm.
contact your bank or contact Microsoft, you get the number from somewhere else and then you double check it before you call them.
Now, I have to ask you, what if you don't have support? Like, I don't have kids.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people don't have kids, or a lot of people have plenty of kids and they're not trustworthy or
Well, I did
savvy.
say family was a challenge, but and this is what we're facing, Brigitte. We're living longer because of great medical advances. That's good.
Mhm.
But we're also facing what I call the 4Ds: divorce, death, disability, or dementia. Many of these tend to isolate us. But also, unlike in earlier years, the family is on the move. So even if you have kids, one's in California, somebody else is in, God forbid, Florida. Just kidding. But the idea would be, but the idea is they may show up for a skip and a wave at Mother's Day or one other event, but you're not seeing them constantly. So that is, in some instances, almost being alone as well. One of the things we have to do is how do we recreate communities? How do
Mhm.
we find a way to protect ourselves with good friends that maybe it's not a family member, but maybe you mentioned chess, maybe you're in a chess club. So you have
Mhm.
that social network. But
Mhm.
staying social, staying engaged tends to keep you from being isolated and vulnerable to the scammers who work on that isolation.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think a lot of this used to happen through the church, but I think that's also an institution that's changing and may not even be equipped to provide the resources because so many of our churches have been decimated with regard to their financial resources, et cetera. You make a really excellent point there. So you mentioned that when you talked about the romance scam, the text scam, and the granny scam. So these grandkids are strangers who've sort of targeted people on the internet. So what I'm hearing from you is that the biggest perpetrators of abuse are strangers. But what about family?
Family is unfortunately, it happens. And this again is where we need you to have conversations early. In most families, we know who the good kid is and who's not the good kid. We can use legal documents to
Right.
build some protections in place so
Hmm.
that we know that Ron should never be around mom's money. So you
Hmm.
don't let me become the power of attorney, which we think is an important document to have. We discourage having Ron, who we know is the bad kid, being added joint to the checking account. No,
Hmm.
when you add me joint to the checking account, by law, that money is all the parents, but it also is all mine. Either one of us can walk
Take it
in
all
and
out.
take
Take it
every
all out.
nickel out of the account. So as we work through preparing for end of life, I would like folks to think long and hard before they make the decision to simply add a child or add another person to the checking account as joint. You can use transfer on death. You can use
Mhm.
the power of attorney because remember that document allows you access to the account, but you still have to do everything on behalf of the principal. If it's your mother and you get the named agent in the power of attorney, everything you do must be for your mother's benefit. And we think that's a document that can help protect against some of these challenges of the family taking advantage.
So, you bring up a couple of things that I wanted to sharpen, sort of dig a little deeper on, because when I think of elder abuse, a lot of times, transfer on death, is it elder abuse if the wishes of the asset owner, the elderly person who passed away, are not observed by the people who are left behind? Like, would you put that in that category?
Depending on how that change was made, yes, it is abusive. If, in fact, the parent decided transfer on death to her son is what they wanted, and somehow the new partner came in and she changed it to
Mhm.
transfer on death to the partner, that's a
Mhm.
form of abuse and
Mhm.
hard to prove sometimes, but you sometimes see it in advance or know about it in advance, and you can take steps then, probably needing to get legal aid, legal help from a lawyer. But that can be a way to tackle that. But it is an abusive practice if folks are doing that.
Right. Okay. That's really, really good to know. Because especially when you see dementia, I mean, in cases of dementia, that can be an extended decline, and that's when people opportunistically step in to have people make changes, et cetera. And so that can be really, really challenging to navigate around.
Yeah, and I will encourage everyone, if you're suspecting abusive practices, you can call Adult Protective Services, give them the facts of the situation, and they
Yeah.
will investigate.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope.
Correct. Yeah,
Um,
it's not necessarily in every case, but depending on the facts, they will make a case and focus on what actually happened and make a determination.
So what you just said led me to the next question I was about to ask you, which is, okay, so now you've discovered that something fishy is happening. Who is responsible for unwinding the situation? So Adult Protective Services is one, but that is a government organization. And I have had a little bit of experience with this. And I know that especially when you have affluent people, if people come in and they can tell stories and fool the agent and sort of get sort of send people away and assuage whatever the Adult Protective Services concerns are. So, who really owns the responsibility for stepping in to protect the individual whose wishes are being manipulated?
Yeah, usually it's probably family or someone close, but you're going to need legal assistance. So
Mhm. Maybe
that's
an
where
attorney.
you're going to need an attorney. You want to sit down with that attorney, lay out all the facts, and then let them decide what the possible legal options could be.
Okay. Now, let's say in a scenario where you've been 90-day fiancé, right? Or tech support scammed or granny scammed or whatever. So you're still around. And maybe you don't have dementia. You're just naive to the ways of the world and you need this money to continue to live for the next 10 or 15 years of your life because you're 80 or whatever. Um, what is the recourse? How do people recover? Is it common for people to be able to be made whole? Or is it more likely that once that money is gone, that person is just out of luck and can't get their money back and has to suffer that financial loss?
No, that unfortunately that is true. The three scams I mentioned, the prevalent ones, these are all usually overseas operators. Once
Okay.
the money leaves the US, it is
It's gone.
almost impossible to get it back. So that's why we
Mhm.
want to back up and shows like this. We want to talk about the common scams. We want to talk about
Mhm.
protections you can put in place. Uh, Depending again, I know everyone doesn't have family around, but you may be able to put in place uh, duplicate statements so that you let a son or daughter know they're
Mhm.
not there to control the money, but they get awareness if it seems like money's moving out faster than you had planned because they get the statements every month. Or for online, sometimes you can offer read only access. Then
Mhm.
some banks will allow you to say, mom can spend up to a certain dollar amount, but if it's over that amount, somebody gets a call or we at least hold it up
Right.
and have a
Right.
discussion.
Right. I remember this with my mom and back on my family just because it's a perfect example and so timely. Just this morning, I was talking to my 75-year-old auntie, and we're super close. And she is not easily fooled. She is 100% with it, and she is no shrinking flower or anybody she's not going to fall for any of those three scams, right? But how does she protect herself from make sure that, especially as she ages, if her capacity should diminish or there should be a conflict with her children or whatever, how does she protect herself and make sure that her intention, first of all, while she's living, her interests are protected, and then once she's gone, her interests are or her desires are observed by her assets are directed in the way that she intended, What steps can she take today to make sure that her intent and her interests are protected?
So initially, today, you want to make sure you're talking to your financial professionals to let them know
Mhm.
what your intentions are,
So she
what your
should have a
plans are.
financial advisor, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I would like to think, and everybody's different, but a financial professional gives you that extra set of eyes that can
Right.
focus on what your intention is. You
Okay, so
also,
brief interruption here.
sure, please.
I think there's a perception, and I think especially among us Black folks, that like you need a lot of money to have a financial advisor, that there's a wealth threshold to engage a professional advisor on your assets. And I know there's some practicalities to that just from a business model perspective at the big firms. If you've only got $100,000 in assets and maybe a house that's appreciated to 1 million or whatever, that a financial advisor may not find it compelling to engage you. So how does that person even get access to that professional?
Remember, the financial profession runs the gamut of folks who will work with you. So you might be able to hire an advisor on an hourly fee,
Okay.
not to manage your money, but to sit down with you, talk about your entire life and all the finances, the insurances, the house. And at that hourly fee, help you write down what a plan would be for you to go forward. Some of that plan you might then want to take to a lawyer to have them help implement it with legal documents. But so it, if you have a lot of money, easier to find an advisor, but you still should be able to find someone either on an hourly basis or one-time consultation fee or what have you,
Like
that
somebody
there
who
is
will give
someone.
you a package, right? Like for a fee.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, that's a great thing to know. Now, what is the role of banking and other financial institutions? I used to be a private wealth advisor at Goldman Sachs, and I did have an elderly client who, obviously, confidentiality, I don't want to say too much, but had some signs of diminished capacity and was about to make a move that his children were freaked out about and expected me personally to intervene, for which I had no right to do. What is the role of banking and other financial institutions in protecting elders from financial abuse? We saw with Wendy Williams getting her accounts frozen because of her diminished capacity, supposedly make a big, that turned into a big, ugly kerfuffle, with her being just angry that she was being limited in her choices. And so the focus isn't on her, but like that can happen at any level. So what is the role of the bank that holds your deposits, or if you do have like a wealth advisor on a platform, what is their role and their fiduciary responsibility to people to help protect them in this way?
So traditionally, what we do in financial services is faithfully and promptly execute your wishes and protect your privacy. A number of states now have said, and Florida is one of them, they said sometimes that simply is not enough. There will
Uh-huh.
be situations where to faithfully and promptly execute the order would commit or put you at financial harm. So,
Hmm.
and there are situations where it would be
That's so true.
important to
That's
reach out
absolutely
to
true.
son or daughter or other trusted person to say, we're concerned about your dad, need you to fly back to Seattle or Washington or wherever and check in on him. So laws in states like Florida now allow the financial institution to do more, to step in, make a report to Adult Protective Services. In some
Hmm.
instances, make a report to the state securities regulator and allow these professionals these agencies have the role of stepping in, making sure everything is appropriate. And if for some odd reason, if the bank made a mistake, turns out your nephew truly was doing your roof, and that's why the money wanted, they can make that correction and say, fine, this looks good. But if in fact there is something amiss, some sort of form of abuse is underfoot, this agency can now step in and do more to protect that elder citizen.
Okay, so say you suspect a loved one or a friend of being taken advantage of, but you have no legal rights. Like a good example would be my auntie, right? Like, so say I am sitting here and I don't have any legal rights. I'm not her daughter, whatever. And I see something that I think is fishy happening and I'm concerned, what steps can I take specifically with financial abuse in particular? Because if I thought somebody was beating on her, that would be almost easier, right? So what can people bystanders do to help?
Yeah, no, and that is a good example. There is essentially a financial beating on her. And the law
Mhm.
in a number of states in Florida makes it easier for you to make that report. It's back to see something, say something. You would
Okay.
report to Adult Protective Services your observations, your concerns, and the name of the potential victim. And they then, by state law, have an obligation to at least take that report and then make a determination as to whether they should follow up, uh, do what they call a wellness check, literally come
Mhm.
out and visit and see if the finances are appropriate or physical health is appropriate or what have you.
Okay. Now, is incompetence considered elder abuse? Because sometimes Pookie and them, help us with our things, and they have the best of intentions and have no intention to steal, but they have no idea what they're doing, so they're making mistakes. Is incompetence elder abuse? How does that play out?
Incompetence can be elder abuse and may, in fact, be elder abuse. The
Okay.
intentions may relate to whether there's a criminal charge brought against Pookie or
Okay.
whomever. But if they are misusing the adult's finances, that is a form of elder financial abuse, whether
Okay.
intentional or not. And we do see that sometimes with folks who get appointed as power of attorney. I
Hmm.
told you what that document's for. You use the money for the benefit of the person that gave you the power. But if I go and take it and start taking cruises to Martinique or whatever, that's an
Right.
abuse. That should be reported, and you will be at least severely reprimanded from an elder
Hmm.
financial abuse standpoint, if in
Okay.
fact you avoid criminal charges.
Well, I was about to ask about criminal charges, but that seems like a rabbit hole, and we are running out of time. And one of the things that I really wanted to get to that we briefly mentioned at the top of, while we were warming up is, what are the barriers to setting up protections for our elders? Like you mentioned, we need to have these conversations as families, but in the Black community, there is a little bit of that's grown folks' business kind of culture still, and it can be very, very awkward to as a let's call it 40-year-old daughter with a 70-year-old mom, get your mom to sit down and accept that she needs to like open her books to you and help her make sure that she's protected. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that starts again with meeting people where they are. And
Hmm.
many times it's a good thing to tell your mom about something you're doing. Mom, I just had a visit with my financial advisor, or I
Okay.
talked to the lawyer, and we talked about the potential that one day maybe I have diminished capacity or someone might attempt to scam me. And there are some things we put in place. Another thing I've suggested is having what I call the family password, so that if somebody calls up with the grandparent scam, you simply say, "So you're my grandson. What is the family password?"
Oh, that's great.
And if you don't get the password, that ends that scam right there. They have to go to someone else. And the other thing is, try never to do this after they've already made a huge mistake. That's
Right.
not the time to say, we got to sit down, we got to do the family meeting, because that tends to get into the shaming and blaming,
Right.
which
Right.
in
People
our
are
community
embarrassed.
we do a little of that. But you want to try and not make the pain worse. But you do have to say, we do need to sit one day and talk about how we can prevent this the next time, of which this family conversation should be a key part.
Okay. So, as we come to an end, what have we missed? What I mean, this is a big, huge topic. I mean, it's your whole entire job and your calling clearly, and I love that you're doing this. All of us who have aging parents and relatives we care about, I think, have lost some sleep about these things. So, what have we not discussed or covered that we really need, that you really want to leave our audience with to think about tonight?
Yeah, and I think you actually mentioned it a little bit, which is be willing to reach out to your family, but beyond your family. You mentioned
Hmm.
talking to your aunt, which is family, but still being
Hmm.
willing to engage, bring them in, cut down on the isolation. And we
Mm-hmm.
think all of this works together to reduce the abuse. And I said family can be part of the problem, but it's also having the rest of the family's eyes on the situation, which can
Mm-hmm.
help in terms of preventing some of the elder financial abuse we see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's really great. I really appreciate this. I mean, I think this is so topical for all of us. It's something I personally care a lot about, and it really does relate to the erosion of generational wealth, right? One of the reasons for the racial wealth gap is that we're not passing generational wealth. And if our people are being taken advantage of, that's 50, 100, $500,000 that's not moving through the generations to set up the next ones and contributes to that wealth gap, which is our whole mission on this show, to close that wealth gap. So I really so deeply appreciate you sharing your expertise with us tonight, Ron.
Thank you very much. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I call it the family continuity plan. When you have
Yeah,
that money there, you can leave that legacy. So
yeah.
even after we're gone, kind of like in the movie Titanic, we still go on.
Our money will go on and on. That's right. That's a great analogy. I love that. So thank you again. It's really
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
It's been a
Please
pleasure
watch
here.
our other Miami Media Group shows. Mondays, The Business of Black Business with 1 p.m. with Jay Reynolds. Tuesday with me, My Money, Your Money at 7 p.m. with Brigette Lumpkins. Wednesday, Soul at 7 with Nikki Gellen. Thursdays, Lunch with Legacy Leaders at 12 with Anne Marie Sorrell, and Flavor of South Florida at 7 p.m. with Chef Irie. And our newest show, Black Health, on Fridays with Michelle Caron. I think that's at 1 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's work together to close that gap.